So let's talk about some things mechanically on the combine that are going to improve your yield monitoring capability and get the most for your money on a ag leader yield monitoring system. So a lot of the magic happens in the clean grain elevator, as we can see here. And an important component of that is the clean grain elevator chain. Now, some things to look for on the chain. We want to look at the paddles and make sure that they're even along the edge, that they're not tapered one way or another. If they're tapered, they're probably hitting somewhere in the elevator, and we need to figure out why. Another thing to check is these back supports. Most of your newer chains have some sort of a support system, and what I've seen happen is if the combine gets shut off and the processor gets shut down and the grain tank is full or the elevator is full, what can happen is that grain will backflow in and it'll jam. And when you go to re-engage the machine, it can either stall or it simply won't go until you clean that elevator out. And what I've seen happen is these paddles and these supports will actually bend over backwards with the extra strain of the load, and you can actually stretch the chain also, and those will cause issues the next time you engage the separator. It can leave spotty data in your yield maps and cause other issues. Another thing we want to look at is this lower bearing. Make sure it's in good shape. There's also bearings at the top we want to check and make sure those are good. And then also inspect your lower sprocket and your upper sprocket for wear. If these teeth start to wear back, or you can see that there's excessive wear on this gear, top or bottom, we need to replace those, as that's going to also cause spotty data and inaccurate information, because that chain will jump over that loose spot and you will get grain acceleration changes on the sensor, which will lead to your inaccurate data. Earlier we were talking about clean grain elevators and talking about sprockets and when to replace them. If you look at these two sprockets, I have an upper and lower clean grain elevator chain drive sprocket, and as you can see, these are eroded out and worn quite a bit. If we look at this, we can see the rough casting, which would be the original tooth, and all of this wear that is smooth is actually where that gear tooth is eroded away and worn. And this is a prime example of a worn out elevator drive sprocket that will cause that jumping we were talking about. This one's a little bit worse, if you can see that. Another thing we want to check is the tension of the chain. When we roll a link to the bottom, we don't want to be able to pull that link away, or if we do, just slightly. But the ideal tension of the chain is we can't pull the chain off the sprocket, but it just moves side to side with minimal effort. And that would be the ideal tension of your elevator chain. Some other hardware points to check on the harvest system. We've got the moisture module here, and we've got the flow sensor here. So on our moisture module, we can take off our wing nut, remove the moisture sensor, flip it over, get this blade here, and there's a little copper dot here. Now on the newer version, you don't have this piece. It's actually built into the blade on the side. If you have an older style system and this little copper dot, it sticks out just a little bit, if you can catch your fingernail on it when you go across it. If that's smooth, this unit likely needs to be replaced. It's worn. And then just inspect this blade, make sure that it's not bent or damaged. Then look down inside this track. Grain flows from top to bottom, and if you get grain left in here and it gets wet, it'll swell up and bridge, or you get bean pods stuck in here. Then we'll pull these two pins out on the bottom, remove our end cap, and this auger pulls out, and there'll likely be grain come out of here. We want to make sure that's all cleaned out. Then when you power your display down, you'll get a prompt asking you to clean out your elevator mount unit. And if you click yes, you can listen to this motor run to ensure that you have 12-volt power to it and that it's working correctly. And then on the flow sensor over here, you want to pay special attention to this impact plate. This is what your grain hits, and over time it'll start to wear up here at the top and around these bolts. If this paddle's worn down and the top is loose and it flaps back and forth, or you can't get a Allen wrench into these screws anymore, if those heads are worn down that far, this needs to be replaced. And another thing to check on the back side, this paddle bolts to a steel block, and that's hooked to the weigh bar of the sensor. Just give this a little wiggle. If it doesn't move, you're fine. If this moves at all, this bar could be cracked or broken, or your screws could be loose, and that needs to be taken care of before you can harvest.